If our allegiances and our loyalties are very personal to specific individuals and not to the Constitution per se, as it has been set up to be the driver, it becomes difficult for us to create an inclusive culture. When you have a worldview that is against inclusion, it becomes almost impossible for you as a leader to create an inclusive culture, because within you, at the level of the self, you don't believe that all human beings have got something to offer.
Good day, I'm Sean Madliwa. Welcome to another episode of The Inclusion Advantage, proudly brought to you by Franklin Covey, South Africa. I'm very excited with the session we're about to have today. In studio, we have Mr. Goodnews Cardogan, a mentor and a good friend. Mr. Goodnews, how are you, sir?
Oh, Sean. You make me feel like I'm 100 years old.
No.
You say, sir. I feel good. It's good to be here.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I think we're going to have fun here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much for the invitation and greetings to your audience.
Thank you for honoring the invitation. I don't even know where to start when I introduce you. So I'll let you do the honors. Please introduce yourself. Tell me what you are doing now.
Beautiful. I'm a coach. I'm a mentor. I'm an educator. I speak as well. So I'm also a father. Yes.
Critical role.
Yes. I had a very beautiful lunch yesterday with my daughter.
Nice.
And this morning I sent her a message with a whole lot of pictures which I took of her. And I said, what do you plan to do with your little life? Yeah. So it all ends there. Begins and ends with being a family person.
There we go.
And with all the big things that we do out there in the world, what humbles us the most is being in the family.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the nucleus, right? That's where it all starts.
Definitely.
That's where it all starts.
Energy comes from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
Good news. Today we're going to discuss, cultural inclusion as we are celebrating Heritage Month in South Africa. It is the month of September. So I thought, who else but the family man himself, to talk about the evolution of culture and where we are and where we're going, and maybe to guide us and coach us along this journey so that we are best prepared, to build these inclusive cultures, both at home, but also in the workplace.
Exactly.
So just off the bat, just looking at your previous experience at SARS, your current experience as the head coach at C-Cubed, can you share some examples of how cultural inclusion has positively impacted the workplace?
Beautiful. I think when we were at the Revenue Services, we did our best to ensure that culture emerges from leadership practice.
Wow.
They usually say, in fact, it's in the Bible, a fish rots from the head. So culture is emergent out of leadership being.
Wow.
The person at the top of the leadership team, the leadership group itself, and this goes beyond the executive team, beyond the board, into probably the top 100 or 200 people in that organization. That's how culture emerges. The culture of diversity and inclusion comes out of that. So I've had this experience of sitting on the side of delivery as a leader.
Yes.
And ensuring that the culture that emerges out of my practice and my colleagues is reflective of our values. So as a coach and a leader, I've always been an advocate of integral thinking, integral psychology, and eventually integral coaching.
Nice.
It's a values-based approach to life. It says what I believe in, what I value, is going to emerge in how I act in the stage of leadership.
Nice.
The decisions that I make, the psychology that I actually exude as I lead my people, and also influencing my leaders, my co-leaders, to actually buy into this culture of inclusion. So in the end, it's a double whammy for me. I have experienced it as a leader, and I'm experiencing it now as a coach. And in both occasions, I am leading in the emergence of that. Initially, it was the emergence of it as a leader.
Yes.
But now it's the emergence of it as a coach, and influencing my leading clients to deliberately create the culture of inclusion through a lot of things. When we look at whether an organization has got a culture of inclusion or not, we look at the strategy.
Okay.
Strategy itself. If inclusion doesn't appear
Feature,
anywhere as
yeah.
a word there, then there's some red flags about that organization. It's about the policies that they have.
That's right.
It's about the processes that they have. It's about the systems that they have. All of those is the glue in between the people that are actors, right from the top, the proverbial MD, to the proverbial sweeper.
Yeah.
All of those people have to feel that they are included.
They belong.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just leaning in on that, so what are some of the challenges that you've seen and experienced in working with your clients when it comes to developing an inclusive culture in the workplace?
It's that big difference between the espoused values and the practiced values.
Okay.
Because what you see on the wall being displayed there is usually very different from how the practice sort of exudes out of the leaders into the rest of the organization. So many visions and missions and strategies can actually express that this is a culture of inclusion in this organization. But when you attend the meetings, when you look at the proposals, when you look at the budget allocations, they display a different picture, a picture that says inclusion doesn't matter. So in the end, when we look at it from an employee culture point of view, it's about looking at it from what I would call is the employee life cycle.
Yes.
From the point at which you call them for an interview to a point at which they exit.
Hire to retire.
Exactly.
From hire to retire.
So when you observe that life cycle, it will show you some red flags. It will show you also some green flags. So when we actually do an audit of an organization, we are able to see those challenges. Because your resource allocation is important. Your data collection is important insofar as your culture is concerned. Because you can't manage or produce a culture of inclusion if you don't monitor it. If you don't have data sets to tell you whether the inclusion is there or not, you can't really say anything about it. And then most importantly, finally, it's executive pay. If executive pay, at least the risk-based part thereof, the incentives, do not include inclusion as a cultural measure, then it becomes a problem. Because there is no motivation for me as an executive to be inclusive as a leader if it's not going to hit me on my wallet, so to speak. Yeah.
You got to hit it where it matters.
Exactly.
You've also been involved in public policy and communication.
Yes, definitely.
How has that evolved to be more inclusive? Public policy, workplace policies, and how are you communicating those policies to make sure that they are inclusive?
You know, when we were looking at compliance to tax legislation when I was at the Revenue Services, we did research before Deloitte Monitor became what it is now.
What it is now, yeah.
It was called the Monitor Group.
Correct.
Before it was purchased by Deloitte. And we used them to actually research with us using focus groups and other forms of research to find out what is it that drives compliance. And as we were getting the information and the intelligence, we realized that we're going to have to be inclusive in the taxpayer life cycle management thereof. From the point at which we register the taxpayer to a point at which the taxpayer exits. So can you see that this life cycle
Yes.
thing is becoming common?
It's everywhere.
In everything.
Yes.
So by understanding that life cycle and understanding the touch points, we then had to ensure that, that's how we managed to ensure that our policies and our practices are inclusive. Multi-channel approach to engagement with the taxpayers.
There we
A multilingual approach to engaging with the taxpayer, and also being flexible enough to get the taxpayer to choose how they want to engage with the tax administration. Yeah.
Look, I'm not one to advocate for SARS because they take a significant share of our hard-earned income.
For a good cause.
But for a good cause, right?
Yes,
to run our country.
definitely.
But we definitely see the changes, right? I
Yeah.
think the revenue service over the past decade or so has done well in terms of being closer to us.
Exactly. Yes.
The communication platforms you talk about, we see that.
So it was deliberate.
It was deliberate, I can tell.
Nothing happens
tell.
by chance.
Yeah.
When there's intentionality behind creating an inclusive culture, it will show.
It needs to be intentional.
Yes, definitely. It has to be.
Talk to me about some of the examples of such intentional cultural, innovations and transformations that you've seen, whether it's with your clients or maybe even in your own organization. Are there any that we can draw on and share?
Now, in our organization, C3M, we're involved in coaching, we're involved in consulting, in mentorship, training, and all of these, they require us to actually impact the culture of our clients. And by being able to influence them to create that what we know from experience, having sat on their side, it helps us to be able to do that. So the way in which we develop or co-create the strategies, co-create the policies, co-create the practice. So there are 4 elements that we bring in when we get into the client.
Okay.
The first element is about looking at the leader within. So we believe that there is nothing that you can do for another that you haven't done for yourself.
It absolutely starts with
It
you.
is impossible to offer anything to anyone or take anyone where you haven't been.
Wow.
If I've been to Cape Town, I can take you there.
Yeah.
But if I haven't been to Cape Town, I can't even begin to describe
What Cape Town looks like.
how the mountain looks like. How's the weather? How's the culture of Cape Town, and all of that. So even with leadership, it's the same. We are saying that get to be able to be more aware of who you are so that you can master yourself. And by doing that, you can do the second stage of creating culture, which is about leading others.
That's right.
And when you lead other people as a leader and you want to include them intentionally, you have to have an intimate intention.
Yes.
In some circles in research, they talk about professional intimacy. And this has got nothing to do with sexual harassment.
That's right.
It's more about saying, how do I become intimate with my colleagues such that I know what their gifts are, such that I know what their blind spots are. Because by doing that, I am more able to, as a leader, to include them because I know what they offer personally and psychologically, but I also know what they offer from a task perspective. What are the tasks that they perform effortlessly? And thirdly, if as a leader of an organization, I am not passionate about the core things that the organization delivers, it becomes difficult for me to be inclusive in my approach.
Okay.
And this is not like, for example, at an operational level. It's the key things. We knew at SARS then that compliance and voluntary compliance was the core
The key.
pursuit.
Yeah.
So if the leaders at the top have bought into that, it becomes easier then to drive all the other smaller things that they have to do. And then finally, it's more about the worldview. When you have a worldview that is against inclusion, it becomes almost impossible for you as a leader to create an inclusive culture. Because within you, at the level of the self, you don't believe, that all human beings have got something to offer. So you'll be selective in the way in which you include people, and you'll be selective and exclude certain people because it's not part of your value system to include everyone. So by changing our worldview, we are more able to create an environment whereby we're able to lead others, to lead the organization, and to lead transformation really to a point whereby you can almost touch what I refer to as South Africa 2063.
Yes.
Because South Africa 2063, which is the year that some of us will not be around when it comes, is an attractor for creating this inclusive culture. And it's linked to Agenda 2063, which is the AU, the African Union agenda, to create an Africa that we would like to live in.
Correct.
So in the end, if you're a leader on the continent and you don't know Agenda 2063, and you don't have a view of how South Africa should be as an inclusive country in the year 2063, you won't be able to create an inclusive culture in your organization. Yeah, that's how I see it. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate that, and you raised the item of 2063 and the vision towards that.
Exactly.
We're still trying to get to 2030.
Exactly.
The National Development Plan.
Exactly. Yes.
And I must admit that the NDP 2030 is very inclusive. There are a lot of features in there, that speak to driving an inclusive culture in our country, in business, and I think within society and communities as well. And I want to maybe unpack a little bit of that, given the state at which we're at now with the government of national unity.
Yes.
The notion of a government of national unity leads us to believe that it is inclusive. And yet we do see some on the sidelines. And I know that generally people don't want to discuss religion and politics, but
yes.
You being a elder and a mentor of mine, I'd love to hear your thoughts just around how you see inclusion playing itself out in this government of national unity. What is it they would need to do or to bring or to invest in to create an inclusive government that can realize the ambitions that they want to achieve?
Wow, that's a very challenging question. And I think one of the gauges that we use when we consult with companies and coach what I refer to as national leaders, anyone who is a leader who has got a national impact, whether they are in the private sector, the non-profit sector, the public sector, or even in the cooperative sector, as in cooperatives that communities set
Correct.
up. You need to have an approach that says there is a rule of law in this country. And we have created a democratic country that is based on the Constitution.
Okay.
So we live in a constitutional democracy.
That's right.
Which then depersonalizes what I would call political leadership. So if our allegiances and our loyalties are very personal to specific individuals and not to the Constitution per se, as it has been set up to be the driver, it becomes difficult for us to create an inclusive culture.
That's right.
Some of the parties that are in the government of national unity struggle with the concept or the idea of a constitutional democracy because they have created figures or they are led by figures who believe that they are the Constitution. So if you are not loyal to them, you are not worthy to be either in the government of national unity or you are not worthy to be part of the leadership in their party. And second to that is the whole thing of the population itself. I see the population in general as a collective of followership. And I see followership as a form of leadership as well.
Okay.
Meaning that we don't blindly follow.
That's right.
But we are leading followers. And when we are leading followers as a population, it means we will judge leadership on the basis of proximity to the Constitution. Because the Constitution itself is the one that actually prescribes diversity, prescribes equity,
That's right.
prescribes inclusion, and also calls upon us, all 60 million people, to feel that we belong.
That's right.
Unfortunately, when you listen to the various leaders in these political parties, they actually do not understand that. They don't understand that everybody must be included, and we can't include everybody at any expense. Some people need to be excluded simply because they have not bought into the constitutional democracy.
That's right.
So in the end, they're not part of the dream.
Yes.
So if you're going to exclude anyone or any collective, it should be on the basis of the Constitution, the rule of law. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having prisons.
Correct.
Those people that we put in prison as a state, they are being excluded on the basis of them not honoring the individual rights of others.
That's right.
And also not honoring their obligation to make the constitutional democracy to work. So that is how I see it insofar as the government of national unity is concerned, the constitutional democracy on the one end, and the followership of the population who then vote leaders in and out and parties in and out. So there's a need to honor that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yes.
We've got a moral obligation around ensuring that that constitutional democracy that we uphold, is implemented accordingly.
I like the word you use, moral, because the moral code, in my view, is much more difficult to uphold than the legal code. Many people in leadership today speak about being innocent until proven guilty. In the moral code, we talk about being a respectable person, meaning that morally people should actually respect you enough to allow you to lead them.
Correct.
So even if you have not been found guilty in a court of law, but if you have been observed and seen that
you are wanting.
Morally you are wanting, you shouldn't be allowed anywhere near union buildings.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that integrous component.
Exactly.
That leans into the moral code.
We need to be able to connect what I purport to believe in to what and how I behave. And if then morally I'm found wanting, I should not occupy any leadership position. Many leaders today, in any of the 4 pillars of society I mentioned, fail because morally they are found wanting.
Absolutely. I want to lean in on the foundation of inclusion for us.
Yes.
And the foundation of inclusion for us as Africans is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is our fundamental, the principle that guides us. And in its nature of Ubuntu itself, the definition of Ubuntu, is all about inclusion. It's a notion that I think very often has been very loosely used and not wisely understood and not wisely implemented.
Yes.
It's a notion that even us as Franklin Covey, it's part of our ethos in creating Ubuntu, inclusive environments, and empowering our people. What is your take around that notion of Ubuntu, and how can we bring that back to life and see it play its part in society, see it play its part in government, see it play its part in business? Because I fundamentally believe that the principle of Ubuntu is a principle of inclusion, a principle
Yes.
of accepting diversity, a principle of building a united Africa, as it would be. How can we bring that concept to life?
It's a great question, because Ubuntu is about being human. So if we juxtapose Ubuntu with apartheid and exclusion, we can see why, when the Berlin Conference set in the 1800s and started to carve up, Europeans started to carve up Africa into the different states that it is now, alongside that was the dehumanization of the black body.
Absolutely.
So by being dehumanized, it means it took away the
humanity
in me. So when I see you, and I see you as being less than, and I describe you as such in law and morally, it means I want to feel good about mistreating you. Because you're not human enough. You don't deserve to occupy the same spot in society as a white person, because it was white people who
Yes.
actually came up with this whole thing of apartheid and looking at black people as being less than. So by bringing back Ubuntu, and even if you go into the isiZulu language, when we greet each other, we say sawubona, meaning I see you.
That's right.
And I look at you. I can't say sawubona and I'm like looking away, and I'm not actually taking in your
The energy.
being of being in front of me.
That's right.
And then when you respond and you say yes, yebo, it means you recognize that I am also present in front of you.
That's right.
By seeing you as being equally human as I am, it means everything else that I dream of for myself, I dream of for you.
For you.
So apartheid was a kind of a tool that was born of greed. And that greed had to be justified so that we position certain humans as being better than
Lesser
others.
than, yeah.
So that in the end, those who are better than can then earn more, can then accumulate more, and those who are less than can then be reduced to be those who just serve without a requisite income. So Ubuntu means everybody is valued, and the human in me sees the human in you.
That's right.
And if then that is the case, we are on par in the way in which we relate. In psychology, they have got something called transactional analysis. So when I interact with you as an adult, and I see you as an adult, it means, again, I see the human in you, and I don't see the child in you. So I don't speak to you as a parent speaking to a child. We speak with each other as even now as we are
Correct.
sitting. I recognize you as an equal, and you recognize me as an equal. That is the essence of Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
Yes.
I love that. You know, and I love the understanding of how dehumanization came to be.
Yeah.
And I feel that there's still some traits of it that live within certain, sectors of society. And in particular now, as we celebrate Heritage Month, we found ourselves moving from Heritage Day to Bride Day. For me, that was a sense of dehumanizing what the day really stands for.
Exactly.
Right? Because Heritage Day was more than just celebrating the food we eat and our attire.
Yes.
It was about celebrating the humanity
Exactly.
that we are, and our
Yes.
heritage and our roots and the beautiful rainbow nation that we are as South Africa.
Exactly.
And I really believe that, bringing back those principles of Ubuntu can fulfill the dream that Tata Nelson Mandela had
Yes.
of this rainbow nation.
Beautiful.
Is that something that you would agree with?
Certainly, I agree with that 100%, because in the end, how we set up the wealth creation activities in our country, how we drive macroeconomic growth, is going to be driven by those principles. It means everybody then will prosper.
Win-win.
Yes. That's what Agenda 2063 is all about. That's what South Africa 2063 should be about. How do we envisage this? If we were to take a peek into the future,
Yes.
and capture it and pan a camera across South Africa 2063, it will show a country in which everybody is valued.
There we go.
From an Ubuntu point of view. It will show how everybody is valued from all walks of life, different cultures, different age groups. Ageism is one of the things that we don't talk about, where because of my gray hair, I then see myself as being better than compared to the younger people, forgetting that the younger people also have got something to bring in.
That's right.
Yes, yeah.
And I mean, you speak about ageism. It's one of the challenging points that we see, especially in leadership and in governments.
Exactly.
Where our elders don't want to leave the office.
Exactly.
Yes. And give room to the young up and coming
people. Yes.
You know,
yes.
Is that another factor that you know influences
especially on the continent? Especially on the continent, on average, you find that political leaders are older compared to the other jurisdictions in the world. So there's a need for us to young the leadership group.
Yes.
Not only in politics, but in business as well, in non-profit, so that in the end, we can bring in the agility that is sort of treasured in innovation. So innovative thinking is not going to come out of wisdom only. It's going to come out of the dreamer in the young.
Correct.
Yes.
That's another inclusion challenge.
Exactly.
That's definitely another inclusion challenge.
Yes. Yeah.
And one other issue that I want to close off with is really just to zone in on Heritage Month, as we are celebrating Heritage Month. What are some of the trends that you've seen, you know, that whether good or negative, or you know, around Heritage Month and around heritage, South African heritage or African heritage, you know, that you're seeing that are leading us astray, on one hand, and what are the trends that you see that are possibly bringing us closer to Vision 2063?
Yes. I think there is probably, to just aggregate everything to the top so that it becomes a little bit more simple, is the internal condition of human beings versus the external condition. The external condition is what we see. So when I wake up in the morning and I groom myself and I trim my beard, I comb my hair or cut my hair, so that I look and present myself in a particular way, it doesn't say much about my cognitive ability. It doesn't say much about my moral code. It doesn't say much about my emotional state. Neither does it say much about my will to create the desired future. So in the end, what I see as being an impediment to creating a rich heritage for our country and the continent at large is to the over focus on the external condition, how I am dressed, how I present myself, what I eat. So even traditional food. When people talk about traditional food, they talk about the African food as if Western food is not traditional.
Exactly.
So positioning African tradition as being subservient to Western tradition, so to speak. So it's important for us, if we're going to create a proper recognition of building a long-lasting heritage, is to look at the internal condition as well.
Yeah.
It's important for us to understand at a cognitive level, what is it that we are driving? It's important for us to look at an emotional level as to what is the emotional link that exists in between people, between leaders and followers, because that is important.
Absolutely.
And also the commitment to doing something about it comes from the body. It's the will. If I am willing and able to create the Africa we would like to live in, the South Africa we would like to live in, that for me, those are the foundations of the heritage that we should be focusing on. I'm not saying that the dress code is not important.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the food we eat is not important. But I'm saying there should always be a link between what sits within me and what I do and display.
That's so profound, good news, because over the past few months we've seen many incidents of the negative mindset around being an inclusive Africa.
Yes.
Right? The Miss South Africa debacle,
Exactly.
That recently
Yes.
happened was one such. And there are many other, xenophobic instances that we're seeing in South Africa that are even beginning to label South Africa as a xenophobic state.
Yes.
And that's a concern because we are one Africa. The desire is to be one Africa. We are Africans.
Yes.
So for me, when we talk about cultural inclusion, it's not segmented to our borders, but to us as a continent, as a people.
Yes.
Another challenge for me that I also see is the notion, as you said, of dehumanizing things that are important to us as Africans. Like Heritage Day, there's an importance around that and its celebration. And it goes, as you said, beyond the external.
Yes.
Beyond the food that we are going to share and eat on
Exactly.
Heritage Day.
Yes.
It's how do we engage one another? How are we engaging one another? How are we working together effectively? So I really would love to see us as a country and as a continent begin to lean in on the inclusion bit, on the Ubuntu bit,
Yes.
especially when it comes to building cultural diversity and being more inclusive in our culture. But I really love how you've articulated that there's both an internal and an external viewpoint that needs to be considered, and both need working on.
Exactly.
Right? We know the impact of apartheid. Yes, we may be celebrating 30 years of democracy, but there's ingrained apartheid that still lives within us, right? That came through the Bantu education.
Yes.
So there's a mindset that needs to change as well, right? We're focusing so much, I think, on the outward part of our change and our transformation, but we're forgetting that there's some inside jobs
Exactly.
that need to happen. And I think as a coach, you would speak well to that. What are some of the inside jobs that need to happen within our society? We did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Utado Desmond Tutu did well in that regard, but I don't think it was a finished job. The job wasn't done.
Yes.
Because as much as the TRC was important to create awareness and acknowledge, it didn't redress in some instances.
Yes.
And I just wanted to get your thoughts around that, and maybe from a coaching perspective, what are some of those internal battles that we need to fight in order for us to really become an inclusive society?
The most important thing, or the most common way in which as human beings we deal with our challenges, is to externalize the source of our misery. So if I don't have money, it's because someone else is responsible. If I have lost money in an investment, it's because someone else has created the problem. If my family is not united enough and not loving enough, it's someone else's problem. Mama's the next door.
Mama's the next door.
It's not about saying, what is it that is within me that I need to work on in order for me to be the best human being that can be? Many people, sometimes they would go to find themselves by touring the world. And the best way of finding yourself is to use available modalities to understand who you are. That's where we begin from a coaching perspective.
That's right.
Some people, you find that they have got what we call assessment fatigue. They have been assessed so much in their life that the moment you present an assessment to them as a precursor to a coaching journey, they actually feel that it is too much. And I believe it shouldn't get to that level. Self-assessment, 360 assessments, those are the two things that help human beings to be able to know who they are, to help leaders to know who they are, because self-mastery
personal mastery
can
absolutely.
only be achieved through self-awareness.
Absolutely.
And this doesn't just apply to individual leaders, even teams. If you're going to coach teams and they are not assessed as a collective, you've got nowhere to begin. Whether it's in the boardroom or it's in the sports field, as you know, at some point I was with Kaizer Chiefs.
That's right.
Those teams on the field, they get assessed as a team. When the coach sits with the team and they do a game plan or they do a match review, which we have seen on TV many times, where they zone in on a particular player, how they've lost the ball, how they've missed an opportunity to pass it to someone else. All of those things are there to actually look at the team from within, look at the internal capabilities, so that what comes out as action can be corrected. It's very important to start within. So this inside job and external job, insofar as development is concerned, it's important to focus on both. But you cannot improve externally how you make decisions, how you behave, how you see other people, without checking at the source as to why do I see Sean to be less than me? What is the driver of that behavior? Why do I talk down on him when I speak to him? Why do I see Mary or Margaret as a less than human being simply because they are a woman? What is the driver of that? Some of us suffer from childhood traumas.
Limiting beliefs.
Yes. Once we don't know all of those things, it becomes difficult to even start on the journey of liberating others, because we are in chains ourselves. Yes.
I love
so
that.
I would say, in closure, it's great to know who you are, and it's great to know who they are, those who are around you that matter, so that together you can start doing different things, so that you can create the world that we strive for. Whether that world is in the village, it's in a company, it's a city, or it's a country, as in South Africa, it's all going to be able to come alive because we are alive inside. Most of us are dead inside, and therefore we expect to create life out there, and death inside cannot create life out there. That's why inclusion is not going to be, it's going to continue to be a dream that cannot be realized, because we haven't healed inside, we don't have an understanding of who we are, and we are not alive inside, and because we are not alive, we can't create life out there.
Goodness, that's goodness, that's so true, because we see that even now, part of our society feels the need for us to move on.
Yes.
Right? Let's move on from this. Why are we still talking about apartheid and the challenge that we've not healed? Exactly. We have not healed. Exactly. Right? The TRC commissions and all other interventions merely created awareness.
Yes.
And maybe acknowledgement.
Exactly.
Of wrongdoing. But there was no healing. And I think that's where we are stuck.
Yes.
We're still stuck in the pain.
Exactly.
And we see that we are still stuck in the pain. But that pain is also exacerbated by those who are still pursuing their agenda. Right?
Exactly.
So there are still people pursuing their agenda on social media, through bullying and not being inclusive in workplaces. We're still seeing some of those remnants, and I think that then flares us up even further.
Yes.
But nevertheless, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that analogy. And rounding it off from a coaching perspective, for me, I think you nailed it when you said Ubuntu, is about I am, and it starts with me.
Exactly.
It starts with me. I must take personal responsibility
For the self.
for myself, for how I act, how I show up, my view, my worldview, and personal responsibility leads to personal mastery.
Yes.
And only when I am can we become, right?
Exactly.
So in order for us to really achieve the culture of inclusion and Ubuntu within our society, it needs to start with us. It needs to start with me. And that's the inside job that we as coaches,
Exactly.
are busy pursuing. That's the calling, that we are pursuing.
That's true.
I want to flip quickly over to a bit of corporate. And there's this notion that culture eats breakfast. Sorry, let's start again there. I want to switch over to this corporate notion that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes. Lunch and supper.
Lunch and supper, you say?
Yes.
Talk to me about that. Because I do remember that you said initially, when you engage organizations, you do view their strategy.
Yes, definitely.
To see if they are an inclusive organization.
Yeah.
So there's an importance, though, in strategy. But your thoughts around culture eating strategy for breakfast, lunch and supper?
Yes, I would say culture is the inside job.
Mm-hmm.
Strategy is the external job.
All right.
And there's an inseparable link between culture and strategy because strategy is an emergence of culture into being.
Okay.
It's just the same as food preparation. I love food quite a lot, and I prepare food many times in my home. And I believe that when we present food to those who visit us, we actually express love through that food.
Mm-hmm.
So if that food was prepared with love, that's the culture.
Okay.
The strategy of putting the meal together and even plating it is an expression of the love.
Expression of the love, yeah.
That is within. So it is impossible to create sustainable strategy if the culture itself
is not aligned.
A backward culture, a culture of exclusion, a culture of punishing people, a culture where equity doesn't exist, a culture where others are valued and others are not. It is for that reason then that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and supper. Because in the end, whatever you put on the table on behalf of the shareholders and other stakeholders, it doesn't become sustainable. Because it's not only the small leadership group that puts a strategy together that has got to make it to come alive. And in order to get loyalty from the rest of the organization to actually implement the strategy, the culture has got to be conducive.
Absolutely.
So the culture is, again, if you use agriculture as another analogy, it's the way in which you till the soil before you do the planting so that the harvest can come.
That's right.
The harvest will not come on a solid soil that does not allow the roots to grow and does not allow the plants to emerge from the ground so that prosperity can happen. Yeah, that's how it is.
Wow. How do we build these inclusive cultures? And we're heading for a close. How do we build these inclusive cultures that will enable, whether in business or even in communities and in public service, that will enable us to be more inclusive, to represent Ubuntu? What are maybe 2, 3, points you would love to share with the audience around how to build inclusive cultures?
Is to change ways of seeing. Is to change ways of being. Is to change ways of doing.
Wow, let's unpack that.
So the way I see is an expression of how I am. You can take a very small example. If I walk into a room and there's a child there, the way I see that child is going to influence whether I pick that child up or I protect that child. An expression of love will actually direct me to pick up that child, to embrace the child, and to protect the child. And the child in this case is it could be an entity
Correct.
that I lead as a leader. So how I see that entity and all its components being the people that are there
Will
is
show
going-
up.
It will show up, yes. And ways of being, people are able to see whether I'm a kind person or not. Even if they get a snippet of a few seconds of me doing something. So in the end, my being has got to be an expression of my values.
Wow.
And what I do then is going to depend on my way of seeing and my way of being.
Of being. That's right.
And then when I do something like Lionel Messi, for example, or any of the great footballers out there, the way they actually play football is an expression of how much they love football.
That's right.
And also an expression of how, when they do a set piece, they love their team members. Because they will pass the ball to the most able and to the most, or to the
Well
best
positioned,
positioned
yes.
player, so that a goal can be created.
Correct.
Not because they want to
I
get
want to
the
shine.
glory to appear there as the one who has scored the ball. So in the end, those are the three major things: ways of seeing,
Seeing.
ways of
Being.
and ways of doing.
Doing.
Both individually and collectively, will create the cultures that we want. Yeah.
Wow. Mr. Goodnews Cardogan. Ndiyabulela Mhlekazi.
Good.
It's been an honor and a privilege to be with you. We could go on for days talking about cultural inclusion, but we want to go out there and get the job done.
Beautiful.
So I thank you for the time we've had today. Do you have a closing word, a quote you want to share with anyone, with everyone?
First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. And I think the best way of closing my contribution today is that I always listen to all voices, because all voices matter.
There we go.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much to you, the audience. I trust you've had as much fun and gained as much insight as I have into how to build inclusive cultures in the workplace. As we celebrate Heritage Month in South Africa, I wish you all a beautiful Heritage Month. And I call to action that you extend it beyond the dress, beyond the food, and do some inside work. So do some inner work on yourself and look at your own limiting beliefs and build within yourself a worldview that is inclusive of all cultures, all genders, all tribes, all political societies, where we are one South Africa, where Ubuntu shines in everything we do. Ubuntu becomes, a pillar, the underlying pillar of how we develop strategy, the underlying pillar of how we run our organizations. Ubuntu becomes an underlying pillar of how we run our families, how we love and lead with one another. Sean Madliwa signing out, Inclusive Advantage episode. Thank you very much. Cheers.